This is the story of Christianity that you've never heard before. And I'm going to start by asking a question. It's not actually a question, it's more of an observation. You already believe things that you can't see. You see, when someone breaks their promise, that invisible trust that you had vanishes. And it's weird to think about something that is invisible vanishing, but that's exactly what's happening. You see, that trust didn't weigh anything. You couldn't put it on a scale, it doesn't have a color, doesn't have a weight, a length. And sure, it might be transmitted through sound waves, but it isn't the sound waves that are broken when your trust is shattered in someone. There's something else going on here. Your life, my life, they're governed by invisible truths and realities like trust and value and the law, and some of the most important aspects of your lived reality, some of its deepest truths, are not even physical at all. Now, if you're watching this, you might place religious truths in a separate bucket altogether. Religions, after all, they require a leap of faith, so you might think. Faith happens when the evidence doesn't, so you may believe. After all, matter, mechanism, chemistry, accidents, those are the actual substance of truth, and everything else is just window dressing. But as we saw, immaterial truths are some of the most important things in our life. And because of this, I think this materialistic picture of reality is totally upside down. Because the things that we treat as most real, love and justice, are precisely the things that the conventional materialistic picture of the universe struggles to maintain. Physics and chemistry can't explain why consciousness exists at all, rather than just chemical reactions in the dark. And this is what I think is what people have gotten wrong about what it means to have faith. And it's from these facts that we can start to see why Christianity as a governing framework for reality might start to make sense. It isn't just one truth or a basket of historical facts. It's actually a framework, a scaffolding to put together all these invisible realities that govern our lives and the universe itself. And this video is going to share with you a version of the Christian story that you have likely never been taught. Now, before we continue, let's take stock of what Christianity is not. Honestly, Christianity has been buried under so much cultural noise that many of you might just have a caricature in your mind of what it means to be a Christian. And the most important, certainly the most obvious common strawman is that Christianity is a voting bloc. Christianity is politics. It's a weapon in the culture war flag you wave around and swear allegiance to. I'm looking at you, America. But this is a category error. Politics asks, how should we organize collective life? It exists by consent to protect our rights, not create them, but protect them, and even using violence to do so. Christianity asks what those rights are to begin with. What rights should human beings have? What is the basis of those rights? Why are human beings so nasty, i.e. violate those rights to each other? And what is the solution to the problem? In other words, politics is about power over people. Christianity, though, is more of a diagnosis and a treatment plan for a person. Now, I'm not suggesting those two have nothing to do with each other. There's some overlap there, but at a fundamental level, the audience for each is radically different. And when those audiences were confused in the gospel, by the people, of course, and they addressed Christ about it, what did he say? He told them to pay unto Caesar what was Caesar's and to pay unto God what was God's. It's one of my most favorite passages in all the Gospels. The second thing, though, the second area of confusion that I just want to clear up for now is that religion can be dismissed as some big coping mechanism. Yeah, religion is just a story that we tell ourselves in the face of our inevitable mortality. The implication, of course, with that argument is that we shouldn't take religion seriously because it's just one big cope. But the reality is, this is just a basic logical error. The fact that a belief answers a human need tells you nothing about whether it's true or not, right? Hunger doesn't prove that food is imaginary. Here's the bottom line. Christianity is not a political program. It's not a therapeutic tool. It's not a moral instruction manual either. It's a claim about the structure of reality itself. And now I want to show you why much of that reality is actually not visible to the naked eye at all. Let's start from the ground up. The dominant assumption of modernity is that what is most real is what's measurable. Matter, energy, force, mechanism, everything else, meaning, intention, value, consciousness, gets demoted. They're just byproducts of physical processes, useful illusions. But our actual intellectual life doesn't function that way at all. Take law. The difference between manslaughter and murder is not a physical one, right? In both cases, a person is dead. What changes, though, is the entire moral and legal meaning of the act, which is intention, something you can't weigh on a scale or extract from brain tissue. And yet it is the fulcrum on which our justice system turns. Second example, take math. No one's ever held a geometric truth in their hands, and yet mathematical structures govern the behavior of the physical universe with precision that honestly should astonish us more than it does. The famous 20th century physicist Eugene Wigner called it the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, and he meant, why does the universe submit to mathematical description at all? That is not a question that physics can answer from inside physics. And my point here is that the unseen is not weightless. To the contrary, the most invisible things carry the greatest weight in our society. Right? The materialist picture struggles to explain that. Right? It's simply not within its explanatory window. You need another framework to make sense of invisible truths. Now, you can call these invisible realities simply illusions of our consciousness, but then you have to explain why the illusions are so load-bearing. Think about it. Every serious human endeavor, including science itself, depends on treating those invisible facts as real. The scientific method is fundamentally a philosophy. It's not an atom. You also have to explain what is having the illusion. If these invisible realities are just illusions, who's having the illusion? Molecules don't have consciousness that can be diluted, after all. At some point, the most parsimonious explanation is that these invisible truths are just as real as atoms. And if they are real, the next question to ask is, what kind of a universe makes them intelligible? The most important features of human experience, like consciousness, rationality, value, moral obligation, our imagination, are precisely the things that the materialist picture doesn't account for. Let's start with consciousness. It's the sheer fact that there is something that it is like to be you, right? No account of physical mechanism, however detailed, explains why any of it should be experienced rather than just processed, right? You can describe the entire causal chain from photon to neural firing without ever explaining why the lights are on the inside, right? Take moral obligation. The materialist can explain why we feel that cruelty is wrong, evolutionary pressure, social conditioning, empathy circuits, whatever. But explaining the feeling is not the same as explaining the bindingness of it all. Consensus can tell you what people approve of, but it can't tell you what they're obligated to do. There's a chasm between what is and what ought to be, which can't be bridged with more what is. Beneath all of these, why is reality intelligible at all? Why can we make sense of the universe? Why does it submit to rational inquiry? A universe of brute force would be a perfectly coherent metaphysical possibility, and yet we find ourselves in a cosmos, a place that has meaning. Now, the Christian claim is that bedrock is not blind, that behind the intelligibility of the world is intelligence, that consciousness is not an embarrassing anomaly in a universe of dead matter, but a reflection of a consciousness that is fundamental rather than derivative to physical stuff. That's what the ancient world called the Logos. And don't overthink it. It's just the rational ground of reality itself. It's what gives immaterial things meaning to us. And you already accept that consciousness is real, that rationality is reliable, that moral obligation can be binding. You already have an implicit commitment to yourself, to a picture of reality in which the mind is not a late accidental arrival on the scene, but somehow fundamental to reality itself. And the move to God, frankly, is not that big of a leap, to be honest. It's the most coherent place that position leads, that there is a ground of consciousness that we all fundamentally participate in. Let's go back to this idea of invisible things, and I want to discuss a term where we lose a lot of people, and that term is sin. Sin comes from a Greek word, hamartia, and it actually means missing the mark. Breaking a rule is a legal category. You violated a code, you owe a penalty, but missing the mark is a teleological category. You failed to become what you were meant for. An archer, right, who misses the target, hasn't insulted the target, he's just failed at archery. The frame of sin isn't punishment, it's more like orientation, right? And Christianity's claim here is that human beings are aimed at something. We have a nature with a direction built in it. Sin is the name for whatever turns us away from that end. Not merely bad actions, but a condition, a systematic bias in the creature away from the fullness of being toward a fragmentation of being and self-enclosure, right? Every single serious political project in human history has tried to control for sin. Every legal system, every institution of governance, every framework of rights, what are they all doing? They're controlling for human sin. They're controlling for the innate depravity in all of us. They may not use that word, of course, but that's exactly what they're doing. Most institutions are built on the assumptions that human beings, left entirely to their own devices, will tend toward self-interest at the expense of others. That power without, some level of accountability will corrupt, and that greed without some constraint will ultimately destroy society. This is why we have a separation of powers in our government and our judicial system, and between them as well, because we don't trust individuals with unchecked authority. We have contracts because we don't trust promises. We have courts because we don't trust people, frankly, to judge their own cases fairly. Every single one of these institutions is a monument to the doctrine of innate corruption of the human condition. And we see these institutions across all human civilizations in some form or another. You see, the secular world didn't escape the doctrine of sin. It just stopped at giving it a name while continuing to build its entire civilization around it. But the Christian account goes further. Most frameworks treat this tendency as a problem just to be managed. Better institutions, reformed incentives, redistributed power. Those things matter, don't get me wrong. But the Christian claim is that they can't reach the root of the problem because the problem is not in the institutions, it is ontological. And that's a big word. It just means the rot is quite intrinsic to what it means to be human. It runs through the will itself, through the way human beings can know the good clearly and choose against it anyway. Not because of ignorance, but because of out of something darker. St. Augustine called it the will curved in on itself, curvature in se. Not simply weak, it is turned inward when it is made to turn outward. It's not about bad people or good people, it's about nature that both types of people, if you want to even discuss types of people, have. And it's a fracture. It is not innate necessarily to what it means to be human, but it's certainly innate to the day-to-day humanity that we all experience. Then the question becomes, if that fracture runs so deep, what could possibly fix it? Well, it certainly isn't learning and instruction. See, the Hebrew tradition tried it, right? We have the Torah, they had the prophets, centuries of accumulated moral revelation delivered with extraordinary moral sophistication, and it didn't fix it. Not because the instruction was inadequate, actually it was, but because the instruction was never going to reach the kind of problem that actually exists. St. Paul describes this with a precision that has unsettled readers of the scriptures for over almost 2,000 years. The good that I want to do, I do not do. The evil that I don't want to do, that I keep on doing. And honestly, that's the perfect picture of fracture. You don't fix a broken bone by explaining to it what bones are supposed to do. The organ by which you would receive the correction is itself the thing that is damaged. The fracture has to be addressed from the inside. Whatever repairs it can't arrive at information delivered from a safe distance. It has to enter the condition itself. This is where Christianity's most astonishing claim arrives. You see, it's not that God sends yet another messenger or prophet. It's not that he perfects the law for moral behavior. The claim that Christianity makes is that God enters the condition that needs fixing. He becomes a prisoner himself. Most people who grew up anywhere near Christianity have heard the word incarnation enough times that sometimes it loses its strangeness. Strip the religious vocabulary away and just look at the bare claim for a second. The ground of all beings becomes a particular human being, born in a specific place to a family. He gets hungry, he's exhausted, he cries, and then he dies. Right? What does repair actually require? Here's a key principle. You can't fix a system from outside the system. External pressure can certainly constrain and contain, but transformation requires entry. A surgeon doesn't heal a wound by describing it standing across the room. A parent doesn't comfort a frightened child by sending it a letter. There are forms of repair only possible through presence, through entering the condition of the one who needs the healing. And if the fracture runs through human nature, through the will, like what St. Augustine said, through mortality, through the weight of knowing that you're about to die, then whatever addresses it has to meet it where it is, not above it or around it, but in it. And a God who addresses that human brokenness from a safe distance is a God who for whom the creature's suffering is just an administrative problem to be managed. Right? But a God who enters that condition, who takes on the hunger and the weariness and the loneliness of being misunderstood by people that you love the most, that is the God for whom the creature's suffering is personal. The technical and theological word for this is love, right? It's a love that moves toward the beloved rather than waiting for the beloved to become worthy of that approach. It's the kind that bears a cost. Now, if the ground of all being is more like love than law, then a God who becomes incarnate is a necessary part of what it means to be a God. And this is why the resurrection matters. Every human being, without exception, dies. Death is a consequence of existence, of missing the mark. Remember, if we reorient our concept of sin from judgment because you did X to an ontological condition, then the natural endpoint of sin is death. And that's why the Bible teaches that the wages of sin is death, because it's a terminal disease. We know it so well that we've built entire civilizations worth of machinery for not thinking about it, trying to distract ourselves from it, or trying to prolong our life as much as possible. But occasionally, for you and I, something breaks through, a diagnosis, a phone call, and in those moments, the response is not philosophical acceptance, it's revolt. Right? The materialist might say your revolt is understandable but misguided. Death is the most natural thing in the world after all. Your sense that it's wrong is just an evolutionary artifact. Don't worry about it. Grow up. Make peace with it. Christianity says that it isn't. That the revolt against death, the thing that we hate the most, is not a childish failure to accept reality. It's actually revelatory. That death feels like an enemy, it is one. And the resurrection is the answer to it. It's a claim that is both historical and physical and specific. It was that this man, this Jesus, who was dead, became alive again 3 days later. Alive in a way that's continuous with his previous existence and simultaneously transformed well beyond it. It was recognized by people who knew him. He was capable of being touched. He ate barbecued fish on a beach. And this matters because the claim is not that the spirit escapes the body. It's that Platonism. That's actually just Platonism. The claim, rather, is that matter itself, the physical world, is redeemed. That the physical world is not a prison to be escaped from, but something to be restored. Now, people will argue about this, of course, on YouTube. Did it happen? And that's a historical question that I'm not going to pretend can be settled in the next few minutes. The arguments for the resurrection are considerably persuasive, in my estimation, and more serious than a lot of people might realize. And the arguments against it are considerably more convenient than most skeptics are prepared to acknowledge. The tomb was empty. The disciples transformed from fugitives on the run into people willing to die for what they saw. Right? The movement exploded in Jerusalem, the one city where a buried body could most easily have been produced to end the whole thing. The most interesting question is what the resurrection means if it did happen. And it means that death has been entered from the inside and exited from the other side. It means that the fracture that we talked about earlier, running right through the human will, has been met at its deepest and darkest endpoint. The ground of all being doesn't stay dead in Christianity, and if the resurrection did indeed happen, love is not merely a beautiful feature of human experience that gets extinguished when that organism passes away. It is actually written into the structure of being itself. The universe is not a machine that grinds everything to dust. It's actually a creation whose source enters it, repairs it from the inside, and then redeems it. And everything else in Christianity, the ethics, the sacraments, the community, all that is downstream of that fundamental claim of the Creator repairing his creation by entering it himself. Because the resurrection is true, every human being matters because every human being is made in the image and likeness of God and can ultimately live forever. They have infinite value. That claim is not obvious. I think we are sort of like fish swimming in water here in the West, not realizing that the water is actually Christianity. We've taken it all for granted, and we don't even know that the water is there, or where it came from, or that it has transcendent foundations. I want you to just quickly consider the world before Christ. Anyone, but let's start with the Roman world. It was sophisticated, philosophically rich, administratively brilliant, right? And it was operated on an assumption that human worth was a hierarchy. Citizens over non-citizens, free people over slaves, the strong over the weak. Infants would be left to die at the father's discretion. The idea that a slave possessed the same fundamental dignity as a senator would have not just been false, but incoherent and comical. These were not ignorant people that we're talking about. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Cicero, they were working with a different set of moral premises. And those premises just didn't include the idea that personhood itself confers an inviolable dignity, right? The idea came from the claim that God became a particular human being. He didn't become an emperor or a hero. He was a peasant in a Roman backwater. That man, Christ, was God. And Jesus taught that whatever you do to the least of these, you did to the creator of the universe. And that's why the early church ran hospitals for everyone, not just its citizens. They insisted that slaves and masters kneel at the same altar. It opposed infanticide. They established the principle that the weak have claims on the strong that aren't contingent on the strong finding them useful, right? And any betrayal of those Christian principles, and it certainly happened, slavery and the Crusades, they're seen as failures precisely because of the standards that the faith itself has set in us, right? The very faith that put an end to slavery will look back at slavery and think, wow, what a reprehensible act, right? And then we think that that feeling, that moral sense, didn't come from Christianity. It's absurd. Of course it came from Christianity. The critics, frankly, of Christian failure are in many ways, bottom line, operating with Christian premises without either knowing it or admitting that they are. And you just have to look at the 20th century to find out what happened when you remove that Christian scaffolding. Communism, Nazism, the most thoroughgoing attempts to build civilization on explicitly post-Christian premises produced not the liberation of mankind, but its systemic destruction on a level never before seen. And when the image of God was replaced by the image of the state, whether through communism or National Socialism or the race or some historical process of inevitability, the endpoint was not great for anybody. Right? Secular moral frameworks tend to be parasitic on theological foundations that they have stopped acknowledging. And when the story is forgotten entirely, the intuitions eventually follow. So I want to just close now. Let's summarize. First point, you already believe in things that you can't see. You live as though meaning is real, consciousness matters, moral obligation is necessary, and death is a big problem. You've built your life on the foundations that purely materialist picture of the world cannot adequately explain. And here's the version of Christianity that you were never quite taught. That reality is not self-grounding. That beneath the contingent existence, there is a contingent source. There is a non-contingent source. And that source is not less than mind, not less than love. Human beings are creatures with a nature and a direction, and something has gone wrong with us at a very deep level, and no amount of education or politics or institutional reform is ever going to fix it. And that the ground of all being did not address that wrongness from a safe distance, but entered it, took on flesh, bore its full weight, including the weight of death itself. But that death couldn't hold the master of the universe. And I can't prove this with mathematical certainty. Neither can I prove that consciousness itself is real, or that justice is binding, or that the person you love most is not simply a collection of chemical reactions that you've developed an attachment for. Every worldview asks you to follow an argument to where it leads and decide whether the conclusion fits the shape of your reality as you encounter it. And this is where Christianity leads me. Christianity is demanding. It implicates you. It looks at all the things you want to keep the most private and brings it forth publicly sometimes, and it will on Judgment Day. I'm a Christian, bottom line, because I take reality seriously. And Christianity is the framework that holds it all together without flinching, right? That doesn't shrink at the hard parts. It looks at the full strangeness of existence and says, yes, this is what we would expect if the story of Christianity is true. This isn't proof, but it's not nothing either. And the more seriously I take reality, the harder it is to dismiss Christianity. Thanks for watching, everyone.